Hi, it's Corey. Welcome to the See Jane Build podcast. Today we are talking about all things lighting with Jules Gim. Jules, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Corey. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to be an architect, and why you love lighting?
Sure. So I grew up in Seattle, and at the University of Washington, I studied industrial design. And while I was studying, we worked on a project that had to do with seasonal affective disorder, since it's so gray and depressing 9 months out of the year. And the basically cure for seasonal affective disorder is light and the amount of light your eyes are exposed to. And I found that very fascinating. And so that kind of opened the door in my world to lighting design. And then after moving to New York, I studied lighting design at Parsons, and I've been a lighting designer ever since. So it's been 25 years now. And I've worked in many, many sectors, focusing on hospitality, retail, workplace, cultural, landscape. So I've been kind of around the block with many different types of projects. And I'm currently working at Lighting Workshop, and we're based right on the waterfront in Brooklyn. And I work with a really amazing group of designers there. We're a group of about 20 and really enjoying it.
That's awesome. So I'm sure, I know you have a child, since our children are friends, full disclosure. And so I'm sure you know the movie Cars with Lightning McQueen. So we could really call you Lighting Queen. We could create a whole new franchise about it. Also, full disclosure, Jules has been to my New York house many times, and always my husband would pester her about our lighting, because our lighting was always not up to Jules standards, because we never really gave it a second thought. But that's a whole nother story, and probably, requires some lighting therapy from us. But that's okay. I don't take care of plants, and I'm not very good at lighting. So those are two of my main flaws. So let's talk about, why lighting is important. You touched on it a little bit, the seasonal affective disorder, but, why should people care about the lights in their house?
Well, lighting affects our mood. It creates ambience in a space. I feel like a lot of the times when you notice the lighting, sometimes it's because it's bad lighting. So you go to a restaurant that you've been wanting to go to, and you step inside and you wanted this nice, maybe romantic dinner date with your partner, and you feel like you're, in a, big box department store, because the lighting's just totally off and it's very unflattering, and it maybe affects the experience. So we're always surrounded by it. And I feel like because it's not a tangible experience or element, people don't maybe prioritize it when they walk into space or when they're designing their own space. But it affects kind of everything. It affects your perception of the space. It affects the perception of how you see others, yourself, your mood. It affects the hierarchy of a space. So when you walk in the space and you're looking around, the light is guiding you on maybe a focal point. So I feel like that's why lighting is so important.
I'm thinking also, to digress for a second, that we're recording this on a day when I took my dog out for a walk at 6:30 this morning, I had to take the flashlight with me because it was so dark, and I was just in my backyard. So and that is a miserable way to start the day. So you're right. Like lighting, even the dog is like, why are we out here now? This seems like it's the middle of the night. So pretend I'm a homeowner about to build or about to renovate. I am definitely probably not thinking about lighting. And you're right, I probably should. So what's the first thing I should think about, and how do I think about it when I'm not even sure about what I want in my new kitchen or in my new house yet?
Well, I think the primary item to think about, or element to think about when you are planning the lighting for your home, is it's just starting with the basics. What do you like? What do you like to feel when you're in your kitchen? Do you work a lot in your kitchen? Do you feel like you need a lot of light because you're always preparing food and you want to be able to see in detail what you're doing? Or, like some New Yorkers, they use their their kitchen for storage and you put your shoes in your oven and you never cook.
Closet mood lighting, right? So get dressed. The kitchen became a dressing room.
Exactly. And maybe you use your kitchen because that's where you entertain and you like to order takeout and you have your friends over and Friday night they come over and you just relax over, some drinks and tacos. Then it's, a different priority for how you'd like to light your kitchen. So it's really, how do you think of each space and how do you want it to feel? That's how I would start off, just with the basics. What do you do in your living room? Do you typically are just kind of binge watch Netflix, or do you spend a lot of time reading in there? If you spend a lot of time reading in there, you want to make sure you have enough light to see. I know at a certain age, I'm experiencing this at my age, I need more light. I'm one of those people, I put on the flashlight on my phone when I go to restaurants because I can never read the menu anymore.
We're all like that. You are not alone. I think the restaurants have gotten darker and all of our eyes have gotten worse.
Yeah. You want to, exactly. It's not us, right? It's just all.
It's never us. It's always them.
So those are just the basics, how when even your bathroom, do you like a lot of light because you like to, make sure you see all the fine details when you're putting on your makeup, or do you not wear makeup, or that's not a priority? And so you don't need a lot of light around the mirror in the bathroom, just those basic needs that you need. And also comfort, going back to the living room, if it's an area that you like to relax in, then you typically think of lower light levels. Or maybe you're thinking of, you're creating just a few different scenes, and I'll talk about that later, in a space where you have your friends over and you entertain a lot, and then you almost want like party lighting, maybe lower light levels. And then you have maybe a desk in your living room where you work during the day and you need a lot of light. So I'll call it a scene where you really want to increase the light level, especially during the winter when you don't have a lot of daylight, depending on where you live. So there are all those, just the basic function and needs of each space. So you'd start off there. And then the next thing you think is, are you doing a full renovation and you are putting up new ceilings? Ideally, you want to think about lighting and placement then, because then you can think about, if you want to recess fixtures in your ceiling, you can think about placement, where you want them. Versus if you say, no, I really don't need a lot of light, and I'm happy with mostly table lamps and floor lamps, then you're just thinking of making sure your outlets are near wherever you need your table lamp, next to the chair, your favorite chair where you like to read. You want to make sure you take that in consideration and you're planning that. So those are the first steps in terms of what you're thinking about when you're thinking about adding in a lighting layout to your space.
All right, so let me stop you there for a second. Do you think, I have a lot of recessed lighting in my house here in California, and I had a lot in New York, and I would say, for better or for worse, I'm a person that, other than the recessed lights and other than my nightstands, I don't have a lot of other lamps and lights around, maybe on a desk. Do you recommend that people always put in recessed lighting if they have the opportunity, even if they don't think they're going to use it, but for resale or anything like that? Because you don't have that many opportunities to do that.
Right. So in your home, I feel like the critical places where you'd want to have recessed lighting is if you are an art collector. If you have, say, that wall where you put all those favorite frame photos of the family, elements like that, and you really want to highlight them and make those moments special, those are great opportunities for recessed lighting. And you put lights in your ceiling that are directional, or lights that are called wall washers, where they're permanently aimed at the wall, and that becomes a focal point in your home. And this goes back to visual interest. So when you go into your living room and you have, let's say, your favorite paintings or that favorite family portrait wall, your eye will go right there, because in the evening you turn the lights, and the lights automatically are kind of concentrated on those elements. So that's when you think about whether or not, when you're asking yourself, do I really need recessed lighting? I would say, if you have a permanent architectural feature, or you're an art collector, or you have materials or finishes that you want to highlight in the space, that's a good opportunity to recess fixtures in your ceiling. And that's when you'd want to really do that.
Which is so interesting you say that, because I'm sure I'm not alone, that when I bought my house here, when I bought my last house, actually, when I built a house, I have lights in the ceiling in every room. Like I never even considered that I wouldn't do that. It just seemed like, well, that's what you do. You put your lights in the ceiling, but you're telling me I didn't necessarily need to. Well, I needed to because I'm lighting ignorant, but that other people don't necessarily need to do that depending on how they're using the space.
Well, I feel like it has to be, to me, it has to be very intentional that you're not going to put lighting in the ceiling. You're saying, okay, I'm fine. I'm fine just having table and floor lamps, and I'm totally content with that. And if it's a very conscious decision, then it's fine. You just are in a pickle if you realize I have all these amazing art pieces that I hung that my daughter did when she was 5, and I wanted to hang them on the wall and feature them. And I didn't think about that. Now you don't have a way of really highlighting them. If you just are having your table lamp and floor lamps, it creates a nice general ambient glow in your space, but you have no kind of punch where your eye is really collectively drawn to, those special moments. I feel like the other option when you come across a situation is just what's called a retrofit. So say it's a retrofit housing where they go in after your ceiling's finished and they, cut the hole in your ceiling, but you just have to be careful because your options are very limited typically when you're retrofitting fixtures into architectural elements. Even if, say, you're putting a picture light above a painting, someone has to go in and they're pulling wire to the outlet that is hidden somewhere, hopefully behind the painting. So there's all those kind of afterthoughts that may be much more invasive and much more troublesome if they weren't thought out in the first place.
Sure. And I would also say, everyone needs to think about this before your plans are drawn. I mean, because we can talk about this in more depth, but a homeowner would work with an architect to create the plan, and that's what a contractor will execute from. And if every single light in the ceiling, outlet, light switch isn't on that plan, then even if you're still building, if you decide you want to alter things, that's a change order and that's more money.
Exactly. And then all the coordination involved. So exactly. So once you kind of come up with your kind of needs and wants of each space, and then you're speaking to your architect or designer, and then they're putting all that information onto drawings. The next step after they put down the drawings and after you look over the information and approve it is that all the coordination involved with the electrician or the contractor or the mill worker or whoever else is involved with your home, they are going to now look at that information and start organizing from that. So that's why it is really critical, and it helps make everything go smoothly if all that's on the drawing and all of it is coordinated yet approved first by you, so that all the locations are where you were expecting them to be.
Yeah, and I have to say, when I built a house on the North Fork of Long Island, and when I first looked at the set of plans and saw that there were lights on there, I mean, it surprised me. Like maybe I had talked about it with the architect, but it was definitely, when I went through that experience, not something that I realized I needed to be thinking about at that stage. Obviously I learned that pretty quickly, and we had great lights in our ceiling, but thankfully my architect was like, yeah, no, you need to think about this now, and we need to put it in. And the other thing, well, there's a lot of things, but so, light switches. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Light switches can work with outlets. They can work with your lights in your ceiling. But one thing people to think about if they're doing a massive renovation or if they're doing a new build is, where do you even want those switches?
Yes.
What do you need? One per room? Are there rooms where you're going to want 2 switches that handle the same light? And people should literally feel their way around their house, or mentally feel their way around whatever they're looking at on a piece of paper. And you have any thoughts on how people can approach that little piece of this?
Yes, definitely. And this is critical because this is how you're controlling the ambiance in your space. So let's say you have recessed fixtures in your ceiling, and then you have your table lamps hardwired, and you can control them from the switch. You walk into your space, you open the door, and exactly what you're saying, Corey, you want to visualize. You walk into the door, and let's say the door swings to the right, then you reach with your left hand for the switch. And it seems so silly, but you do have to kind of picture yourself walking the space and automatically think, what would you intuitively do to turn on the lights? You would definitely then reach over, and then you'd want to have Now, when you think about the switch location, now you're thinking of what the switch looks like. Is it going to have what's called multiple gangs, where you have multiple switches for each application in the space? So you have one switch for, say, the downlights and one switch for the table lamps. And then what's critical, what I find, it's like mandatory really for almost every space. You want to make sure everything is dimmable.
I knew you were going for that, which is tricky these days because you have to find the right, I mean, obviously, in theory, your contractor and whatnot should do this, the right switch with the right dimmer for the right bulb.
Exactly. And that's where all that coordination comes into play. So once you start having your lighting layout on the drawings, and then as a lighting designer, you have what's called lighting specifications, where on the drawing, next to each, say downlight is represented by a circle, there's a nomenclature next to that circle, say it will be the letter A, and then you look at the specifications and it will say, indicate letter A is this recessed downlight by this manufacturer. Here's the ordering code. Here are all the options that go with the downlight, which include the size, the type of lamp, whether or not it's LED or another lamp source, the color temperature, and that's really critical. I know, Corey, that's what we talked a lot about at your place.
Right, warm, cool. I fail every time.
I remember you guys did change some of them, and it made a difference. And color temperature is basically the color of the light. So it is basically a measurement, what they call, and this is like, not to like bore people, but it's the measurement against a black box. So it's taking a measurement and applying a number to it. So 3000 K color temperature is what you typically use. Well, I would say most spaces, retail and workplace, but in homes, you want to go warmer than that, and which is the lower number. And that's because it creates a more cozy feeling, replicating, say, candlelight or, a fireplace. So it has that more golden hue tone, which is much more flattering on people's faces as well. So with homes, you definitely want to go, I would highly recommend going below 3000. So say 2700K, 2200K is where it gets really more orangey. And you see that sometimes in hotels and restaurants, but it really creates such a beautiful atmosphere.
And yet it can still be bright.
Yes.
I mean, because that's important too. Like I want my living room to be super bright when I want it to be, and then also chill when I'm just watching a movie or, sitting around having a glass of wine.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. All those, and you want to have that flexibility. That's why dimming is very important. Different types of, for me, I find what creates a more interesting atmosphere is when you have different sources. So it's not just downlights, but you have your downlights, maybe you have lighting integrated into millwork, maybe you have your table lamps, your floor lamps. In the kitchen, you're going to want under cabinet lighting. And you can't forget about all the daylight. I prefer, if I don't need to turn on the lights during the day, I just don't. That's my number one preference, is to work and live via daylight. It's also, of course, energy friendly. It's, to me, the most comfortable. It's the most flattering. So it kind of hits all the buttons, but at night or when I'm working, I need more light. That's when I'll turn on the lights.
And I think that people really need to intentionally, especially, I mean, obviously if you're just redoing your kitchen, you're limited, but if you're starting from scratch with a build, or you're really sort of doing a massive renovation and you're rethinking every space, you really should think about, where is the natural light hitting the most, and what space do I want that to hit? Like if all you do is sleep in your bedroom, you don't want that to be the room that's getting the most natural light, because you're wasting that light. You want it to be in places. I mean, I go back to my house in the North Fork, and it was intentional and slightly accidental, but most of the time in the summer during the days, we never turned on a single light ever in any room in that house. Yeah. The rooms that got the darkest were the bedrooms, but the main space where we spent most of our time was, and granted, we also had a ton of windows on every side, but that was very intentional to maximize the light. But I totally agree. Natural light is, there's nothing that beats it.
Yeah. And going back to seasonal affective disorder, right? Yeah. That's what you need. You need all that daylight. You need it to, it does affect your mood.
Yes, it does. I had to move to California to get more daylight.
Yes, you'll never have seasonal affective disorder.
Well, I might, because as I said, I had to walk my dog in the dark at 6:30 this morning. But that's okay. She's cute, so it works. So we talked about different lighting sources and table lamps and floor lamps. And one thing that I have to say is actually a pet peeve of mine, but you might tell me it's the most practical thing ever. I don't understand floor outlets. Because I feel like if you don't exactly know where you're putting your furniture, which I think is a big ask when you're starting to renovate, because you have so many other decisions to make and you need a general sense of where you're going to put things where. But it's one thing I personally have never understood. But go, you can talk me out of that and tell me they're the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, I love floor lamps. I love them, but you're totally right. You don't need floor lamps if you really have no idea where you're going to put your furniture. You only have floor lamps if you absolutely know I'm going to have a rug over here that maybe covers it, or I'm having my furniture setting placed so I have a table lamp right. It's usually meant to be somewhere kind of in the middle of the room. That's meaning the floor lamp, the floor outlet, and I have my sitting area there, and I don't want to have this exposed cord from the middle of the room where the sitting area is running to the wall. And so that's why I
understand that. Yeah.
And so,
maybe that's why I don't have a lot of table lamps either.
Yeah. But that's why you'd want your floor outlet. So I actually have floor outlets in my living room, but it's because our seating area is sort of in the middle of the space. But it works out perfectly because we have our table lamps, and then they just go and they tuck under the credenza, and they just plug right in there, so it's nice and clean. And again, we knew that was our permanent furniture solution, so we felt comfortable with that. If you don't know, then don't even bother putting the floor out.
And I guess they're better now. I sort of just have this vision of them like bumping up out of the floor and walking over them, and that's partially what I don't like about it. That they're in the way, so to speak. But I guess they've gotten much better now, and they sort of are seamless when they're not in use.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to if they're around a furniture setting, typically you're not then walking on them anyway, because they're tucked between, say, two chairs or, underneath a table. So you wouldn't have that problem.
Yes. I'm realizing I don't think we have any in this house we live in now. I'm going to go look at my floors later and double check they're not hiding under a rug. Maybe it's an opportunity to buy a new lamp. So you mentioned scenes earlier. Talk to me about scenes?
Yeah, so that's when you have, going back to a room where you have a lot going on. So it would really, in a home, most likely be your living room or dining room or kitchen, depending on how much you entertain. So you have a scene is basically when you're setting all the lights in the room to create a specific mood. So you'd have let's say your cocktail party scene where you're lowering all the light levels down. Maybe you're turning off all the lights in the ceiling and just leaving the table lamps on. And then you have like what you mentioned, you like, maybe when you're working at home, you like all the lights on. This is, I'm working from home scene and everything's on at 100%. And then you'd have maybe another scene where it's, dinner with the family. And then you have, for some people, depending on what kind of control system they have in the home, it's just a button that you press and it will bring the light level to a certain level for when you're just at home with your family eating dinner. This is really for people who like, I feel like, who have these very specific needs and feel like they definitely want the lighting associated with those certain specific functions or events in their home. So if this is the case, most likely you don't just have typical local wall box dimmers in your home. You most likely have a control system. So this means your lighting throughout your entire home is tied together. And so you have, say, a control system that knows what's happening in the living room versus the bedroom versus the living room. And then you have your interface on the wall that has multiple scene selections. So you'll have one button that you just press one button and it's programmed. So once you press it, it sets the percentage of how each application is dimmed. So the downlights are dimmed to, let's say, 20%, or the floor lamps are up at 80% during a cocktail party. But once you program it, you just press that one button and it creates that one scene. Again, this is for And just the caveat with this is that a lot of people, it sounds great and it sounds amazing to press that one button, but a lot of times people will also complain they don't want something that complicated, because if something malfunctions or they press the wrong thing, they have no idea how to fix it. So you hear that, which I totally understand. And that happens a lot. No matter if it's residential or retail or workplace, you get that feedback a lot. So maybe that's just too much, but there are systems where you can do that.
And obviously you can do it with your phone too. I remember many years ago, I was visiting London and staying at a friend's apartment, and the friend was not there. It was a corporate apartment, and the lights, it was just switches. They were so high tech. I mean, we could not, for the life of us, the whole time we were there, really master what light switches turned on what lights and turning them on versus turning them off versus what level. I was like, this is way, way too complicated. But I guess, if you are into that, and obviously you can also, if you're into that, have it so it's all running through your phone or something like that. And then you can freak your family members out and turn on the lights when you're not even home, and they can be all freaked out. But yeah. And of course we haven't even talked about, I guess mainly in the kitchen or dining room, you could have pendant lights as well, like hanging lights, which are lovely. I've converted my husband. He used to be anti them, and I think he's come around that that they serve a lovely purpose. He's tall, so I think maybe he just was afraid he would always hit his head. But that hasn't been the case. You're supposed to make sure they're over a space that's wide enough that you can't, knock into it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So once you select your kind of the overall lighting design scheme that you want, then you can start picking the kind of fixtures you want. So you have your recessed fixtures, and clearly those are all in the ceiling, but then all the decorative elements, say the pendants and floor lamps, table lamps, everything that are exposed, you start to pick, what kind of feature do you want? Do you want your, let's say some people like table lamps on their, on the reading table or on the kitchen island? Do you want a pendant that hangs from the ceiling above your dining room table? This is all kind of the fun stuff. This is where it becomes a little bit more decorative. One thing you have to consider, though, is because it's decorative, how much do you need to rely on, say, the pendants above your dining room table to create the overall light level? So you want to be careful. Some of these really pretty, gorgeous fixtures, and we're guilty of this. We have some really, really beautiful pendants in our house that just don't create a lot of light. So it's more like they just help create a mood, but we would not be able to put those, say, over the kitchen island, because when you cook, you wouldn't be able to see what you're doing. Right. So something to consider when you're going through and picking your decoratives, if it's a beautiful fixture, just keep in mind, you need to understand how much output it provides.
And not only that, and certain things like fixture over a dining room table, you can know you want to put a fixture there at the very beginning and make sure that that's on the plans, but not have to necessarily pick the exact fixture right away. But let's say you want to put sconces in your hallway, or that you want to use them as your bedside lamps instead of a table lamp. The more you can think about that ahead of time so that you're wired for it appropriately, so that you don't have wires. If I put a sconce on a wall, I want the electrical happening right behind that lamp. I don't want a cord running down. It's the same way with our TVs, how we don't want a cord running down the outside of the wall. Ideally, you want the electric and the cords for the lights inside the wall. So people they don't necessarily realize they need to think about those lights too from the beginning.
Yes, exactly. And I just want to touch upon this whole idea of understanding what you have prior to purchasing, and also prior to coordinating with all the other team members who are helping you on your house, is that when you start selecting fixtures, and once you have all that documented, when you give that to the contractor or the electrician, then they can make sure that whatever dimming system or wall box dimmer they select is compatible with whatever is in your space. And that's very critical. So they need to understand that information, whether or not you're using LED. And if it's LED, they need to understand if it's electronic low voltage, what kind of power supply is required. They need to understand all that kind of technical information to make sure that the dimming is seamless.
Yeah, that's all very important, right? Because you don't want to put in an electrical system that can't handle what you want to do in your home.
Exactly.
So are there any other tips or thoughts that you would tell homeowners when they are thinking through this, or things you want to make sure they don't do?
I mean, I feel like, have fun with it and just think you're going to have, when you start thinking about the lighting, you're going to have the mood set exactly how you want your home to feel. And you're like 10 steps ahead because you put your mind to that in terms of putting that into your documents and making that sure that's part of, your new environment. So I would say definitely enjoy it. Definitely look at images. It always helps, of course, to look at types of spaces. Go to go to your friends' homes and notice which rooms you really enjoy and feel like are very comfortable, and start noting that. Even go to restaurants, even when you go to hotels, even you'll notice that you have your favorite hotel and look at the lighting and understand why you feel like that environment is special to you. And most likely the lighting is part of it. And so once you start noticing that, then you can have a better idea of what elements you'd like to add into your home.
Excellent. Or you can be like every teenager I know and just string LED lights around the outside of your room. I know you have a teenager, as do I, and she's got several sets. She's got a Halloween setup right now, in addition to the set that lives all the time. I feel like it is a prerequisite to be a teenager in America right now, to have colored LED lights around the where your wall hits your ceiling.
Yeah, it really is. But they're creating their mood and their environment. So
they definitely are. It's all good. And it's a bonus also for those little command hooks that are holding her string lights. It's like a whole market for them that they probably didn't even realize when they started out.
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us about lighting. It makes me want to go walk through my house and make sure that my lighting is up to snuff. And just really enjoy talking to you. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.